when you were watching this thing with this FISA memo, as we're waiting for it to be released, the FBI and the Democrats and the press, the people who are supposed to be dedicated to speaking truth to power, to bringing us information, have gone into this full court press to keep these whatever is in the memo, to keep it silent. The Federal Bureau of Investigation sent a rebuke to the president and his fellow Republicans in Congress, telling them, this is, quote, the FBI was provided a limited opportunity to review this memo the day before the committee voted to release it. As expressed during our initial review, we have grave concerns about material omissions of fact that fundamentally impact the memo's accuracy. So you're putting out a memo that basically makes the FBI, I mean, Devin Nunes has now said this, it makes the FBI look bad for its abuse of FISA warrants, the things that are supposed to allow you to spy on Americans when they're doing something internationally wrong, when they're involved with international wrongdoing. They say we have grave concerns about the fact you're about to issue a memo that makes us look bad. Hey, guess what? You're supposed to I have grave concerns about you guys. I thought what the FBI should have done is they just should have sent a guy around to Nunes' apartment and say, nice government you got here. I wouldn't like to see anything happen to it, you know. We're going to make you an offer you can't refuse, you know. And then you go to Christopher Wray and he's like, if you had come to me, Devin, your enemies would be suffering this very day. You know, it's like the FBI. It's like something out of transcendental philosophy. You turn into what you're looking at all the time. And now, by the way, they're saying there are omissions, but they're not saying the thing isn't true. They're saying there are omissions that may make it unclear what's going on. Now, Adam Schiff, my favorite congressman, because, you know, Adam Schiff, I don't know, you probably don't remember Lil Abner. Lil Abner was a parody cartoon where, remember, they made it into a musical and the country's in the very best of hands. It's just how sleazy government is. Adam Schiff could have stepped out of a Lil Abner panel. He accuses Devin Nunes of sending a different version of the memo. He says that his staff discovered Wednesday evening that the memo sent to the White House was materially different than the one that the committee voted to release. And now Adam Schiff is demanding that they bring the memo back because it's not the same memo. Byron York, who has been doing an absolutely great job of covering this story, he says he just talked. He put out a tweet, says, I've just talked with a House intel source. He said the total changes to the memo were A, an unknown number of grammatical and clarifying fixes, B, one change requested by the FBI due to sources and methods concerns, and C, one two-word change requested by Democrats for accuracy. So Philip Mudd goes on, just talk about tossing mud. Philip Mudd goes on CNN, and he just uses every possible you know, this is another one. The Daily Beast ran a story saying Devin Nunes collaborated with the White House about the memo, and then a transcript of the meeting of the Intelligence Committee was released in which Nunes was asked about this, and he said, no, that didn't happen. So first you have Jim Himes, a Democratic congressman. He goes on and he just throws every narrative about the memo out there. This is Jim Himes.
Most of the allegations in the memo are simply not true. You know, we heard not just from the FBI, but from the Department of Justice that the release of this memo would be extremely reckless. And then, of course, the FBI reviewed it on Sunday night and issued the statement that they did. And then, as you probably saw late last night, Adam Schiff and his staff discovered that Devin Nunes and his staff had actually altered the memo before they sent it to the White House, which is a very clear violation of House rules, because, of course, we voted on one set of allegations. Democrats voted against releasing it, and then they altered the language to send it to the White House. So what is happening here is not in any way, shape, or form unclear. You have a political attempt drawing on falsehoods, and the victim in this case will be the American people's, or at least a portion of the American people's, confidence in the Federal Bureau of Investigation and in the Department of Justice. And that's a terrible cost to pay for a ugly political maneuver designed to protect the president from Bob Mueller's investigation.
So it's reckless. There are omissions. It's not true, and the not true are omissions, and they changed it, and the dog ate my homework, and my mom said I was okay to listen on the phone. You know, it's like what are they talking about? They're just anything to keep Some of the Republicans have been talking with so much hyperbole about this memo that I've been thinking to myself, don't oversell it, undersell it, and then let it really come out and blow people away. But the way they're reacting to it, the way these guys are reacting to it really makes you feel like something bad is in this. And it is bad. I mean, just to remind you, FISA is this court that it was specifically set up after Nixon listened to domestic people for political reasons. After Nixon bugged the phones, tapped the phones of people for political reasons in America, they set up this FISA court to make sure that wouldn't happen again. It seems it's possible it has been happening again, and happening to a guy who was actually running for president at the time. I mean, if you heard about this happening in Venezuela or Guatemala or some like tin pot dictatorship, you'd say, yeah, that's what they do. Ain't supposed to happen here. And then, as I said, the Daily Beast ran the story that Nunes collaborated with the White House, and then it turned out that that story was completely ridiculous. So Philip Mudd on CNN goes on and he says, well, he may not have collaborated, but he did. Listen to this.
I'm going to break the camera here in a moment, Aaron. Have you ever worked in Washington, D.C.? I've worked at the highest levels of the FBI, the CIA. I worked on the National Security Council and the White House. In the midst of the highest profile investigation of political corruption we've seen since the 1970s, in the midst of a precedent of cooperation between the Congress, including Devin Nunes and the White House, do you think it was a secret that congressional officials were preparing a memo of this import and nobody knew at the White House? You got to be kidding me. I'm going to tell you the moon's made of green cheese. I'm not saying there was cooperation. I'm not saying there was collusion. I'm saying in that small town of Washington, D.C., that to suggest that nobody at the White House knew that congressional staffers were discussing a memo of this import that's ridiculous. It's not about whether Devin Nunes coordinated. It's whether somebody knew over a cup of coffee and talked about it. And to tell me they didn't is just stupid.
So they didn't, but they did, but they didn't, but they did. So, this really does. I started out talking about the Bible for a reason. One of the things that has always fascinated me in the story of Christ's crucifixion is it's essentially a judicial murder. He was murdered by the state, for reasons of political expediency, and murdered by religious people. I say this many times, and people get annoyed. Maybe I'm not sure they actually understand what I'm saying. That there are no villains in the story as we think of villains. There's nobody who is rubbing his hands together and saying, "I want to kill this guy simply because I like killing." Each person is simply fighting his corner, is doing what he thinks is exactly right to do for the people he represents and the institution he represents. So Pilate, is doing what he thinks he needs to do to keep the peace. The religious authorities are doing what they think they have to do to keep from a heretic from talking to the people. The people are all ginned up and they're passionate. They want this guy killed. Same guy they were cheering, 20 minutes ago. They want him killed. Each person is acting on his own interests and acting in the interests of the institutions he represents. The world is built to suppress the truth. The world is like a machine that is built to murder the truth. Nobody has to do anything special for the truth to be destroyed. All these people, here's this guy, Mudd, screaming and yelling about, he's theoretically a journalist. I've never met a real journalist who wanted to keep a document secret. I have met journalists who, after torturing themselves, said, you know what? In the interests of national security, I've got to keep this document secret. But we have now journalists who are willing to fight to keep the public from finding things out. It's like, that's my job. I'm a journalist. My job is to keep people from finding things out. This is just the way, this is what the Bible teaches us, this is just the way of the world. That is what the world does. Yesterday I talked about the fact that I thought Trump's State of the Union message was so brilliantly constructed to set the Democrats up in the immigration debate, to set them up to show how intransigent they are, how unwilling to compromise they are, how unwilling they are to support America. Luis Gutierrez was running for his life when they were chanting USA, and they were all sitting on their hands talking about the flag and the national anthem. And then he pulls out the immigration deal, which to any fair person is a pretty good compromise. It's going to get him in trouble with Ann Coulter and all the people who want the borders completely sealed off. But he made them look, Thomas Edsall, who's a leftist journalist who was writing in the New York Times, which used to be a newspaper, and Edsall said he has got the Democrats exactly where he wants them. He wrote this piece that said, see, everybody says everything that I say, but it just takes time. First they say that's not true, and then they say it. President Trump's immigration proposal has put Democrats in a bind. They know it, and he knows it. Trump's immigration framework, first outlined on January 25th, represents an unusually sophisticated strategy. He proposes to more than double the number of dreamers granted a path to citizenship, significant concession to Democrats. In return, he seeks approval of a set of policies strongly opposed by the left, each of which is designed to stem what Trump sees as a threatening increase in the non-white population of the United States. That's what Trump is worried about, the non-white. He doesn't want an increase in that. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous. But at least he's honest about this. He says for a Democratic Party whose electoral strength depends on Hispanic support, preventing the deportation of the Dreamers and providing them with legal status has become a matter of political necessity. So at least he admits that. For the rest, it's all the world suppressing the truth. Racism, racism, racism. And my favorite, Nancy Pelosi saying that Donald Trump is fear-mongering. I love this.
So it was, I would say, confusing. It was worse than that. It was dangerous, what he said last night. And it has instilled fear, as I say over and over. What he is doing brings tears to the eyes of the Statue of Liberty and instills fear in the hearts of people who are concerned.
Because Nancy Pelosi would never, ever fearmonger. We have a little montage for this.
Because it's a Frankenstein, and anybody who's familiar with Frankenstein knows that it was a creation, a monster that was created. Do you know the ending of the Mary Shelley's story? The monster comes back to destroy. This is Armageddon. This is a very big deal.
Many more people, millions, hundreds of thousands of people will die if this bill passes.
Any person that you can name suffers greatly from what the Republicans are doing. It's impossible to exaggerate the harm this bill will cause. This is God's creation. We have a moral responsibility to it. To minister to the needs of God's creation is an act of worship. To ignore those needs is to dishonor the God who made us. That plan is a campaign to make America white again.
It's like, but again, Nancy Pelosi is simply doing what the world does. Don't move, don't change, just let the world, because if you sit still by pure inertia, you will be enslaved. If you sit still, the world is built for lies and slavery. That is what it is built to do. What the human machine naturally does. It is only direct action that stops it. I mean, this is what Ronald Reagan said. He said freedom is only one generation, always only one generation away from extinction. It takes force. It takes human beings to stand up and insist on the truth. The great comfortable machinery of the world moves toward lies and slavery all the time. It does. This is the story the Bible teaches us. This is the story of the crucifixion. This is the story of what it takes. And yet, the truth never dies, and freedom never dies, and the dream of freedom never dies. It simply takes effort and sacrifice and will to keep it alive. And that's why we're here. That's why we keep talking.